I certainly intend to have her brought to Saint Denis, but quietly and not just yet. There have been so many of those mournful ceremonies that the nation must be tired of them. Is your brother in Vienna? I hope he is still devoted to France. I am counting on him absolutely. I wrote him from Lyon. The Allied kings would have done nothing for him. He should be in France. I assured the Emperor of my brother's loyalty. He dismissed me, saying, whenever I wished to see him, he would always receive me after his dinner in the evening. Having said this, he went down the main stairway in order to receive the troops massed in the carousel. My children insisted so on seeing the parade that I agreed. Going through the private apartments, I met the Duc de Visson's Caulaincourt, who told me the Emperor had proposed to him the post of Minister of Foreign Affairs, but he had refused and recommended Monsieur Molay. I pointed out to him all the consequences of this refusal. People know that you are the only man who has constantly advised the Emperor to make peace. Your advice is now more necessary than it has ever been before. You must intervene and bring all your influence to bear against his plans for new conquests. I entirely agree with you, madame. But what can I do if the Emperor has not changed, and if he begins by wanting to reconquer Belgium? My God, I exclaimed. Has he already begun to speak about that? No, but what alarms me is that he should have been received so enthusiastically. A little resistance would have proved more valuable. How can you expect a man not to believe that he can accomplish everything, and even to attempt it after he has met with such a welcome? Then, too, will the foreign powers be willing to discuss terms of peace? That is the great problem. Remember, I said, our conversations with the Emperor of Russia, how anxious he was to put an end to all this bloodshed and never to oppose the wishes of the French people. I have no doubt he will understand, just as we do, that this return is in accordance with the wishes of the immense majority of the French, and consequently he will not seek to oppose our national aspirations. To do so would be entirely contrary to his principles and the magnanimous attitude he displayed. Thus, it is the patriotic pride of Emperor Napoleon that most alarms me at present. May all those about him do their best to make him realize the necessity of peace. That is doubtless true, replied the Duc de Visson's Caulaincourt. But does it depend only on him? Is Emperor Alexander entirely free from passions of his own? I have attended many solemn military displays, but never one that equaled the spectacle presented by this first review. The great Place du Carrousel, all of the neighboring streets, the houses, the roofs, the scaffoldings were covered with an innumerable throng. Their frantic cheers were echoed by the cries of "Long live the Emperor," which the soldiers of all regiments, officers of all branches of the service uttered as they waved their helmets and caps at the ends of their muskets and swords. I remembered having seen the crowds at the height of the empire carried away with joy. On this occasion, they were simply mad. Only the battalion from Elba remained calm and silent. With a noble pride, it seemed to accept its share in the popular rejoicings. The martial faces of these grenadiers, browned by the southern sun, their clothes still covered with dust, distinguished them from all the rest. They had arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning in the courtyard of the Carousel, and they had bivouacked there with a party of the 7th Regiment commanded by Monsieur de la Bataillere. They had marched 35 miles in order to catch up with the Emperor, having heard rumors of the disguised Chouans who were to have attacked them. When I came home at 5 o'clock, I found General de Girardin there. He told me he had gone to the camp of Melun, decided to do his duty in favor of the Bourbons, but that the place had been in the greatest confusion with no one to take command, and all the troops had followed the general movement and gone over to the Emperor. Colonel de la Bataillere arrived just as I was going in to dinner. I asked him to stay and dine with me, and at the same time relate all the circumstances of his surrender to the Emperor. He told me that when he rejoined his regiment, he had not the slightest idea that the emperor was about to land, that he could not explain the return except as being due to the emperor's desire to free his country from the state of humiliation into which it had fallen. He himself, as soon as he heard the news, believed that his country could be saved, and he had left Chambéry with the firm intention of helping the emperor's enterprise as soon as he could do so. On arriving at Grenoble, Monsieur de la Bataillere, in spite of the orders issued by his general to disperse his regiment in different parts of the town, massed it in the central square, and having harangued it, being sure his troops would follow him, he led them out to meet the emperor. He encountered him at 9 miles from Grenoble. The emperor came toward him, embraced him, and handed him the insignia which he had on his own hat. They discussed at length the situation in France. Monsieur de la Bataillere took advantage of this opportunity to say, "Sire, your only hope of continuing to govern France is to adopt liberal ideas." "Do you think I am afraid of such ideas?" replied the emperor. "After a revolution such as it has experienced, France, with all the political passions still at boiling point and all class interests on edge, needs a firm hand to govern her. I, and I alone, can give the people that liberty to which they are justly entitled. Everything that has taken place this last year has shown me what their true wishes and desires are. The hopes they place in me shall not be disappointed." Having said this, Monsieur de la Bataillere added emphatically, "Ah, madame, if France is to regain her independence, if the emperor will provide her with a liberal constitution, if personal liberty is assured, and the national laws are properly enforced, I shall be satisfied, because I shall feel that I have contributed something to my country's salvation." Everything about him indicated a strong and loyal character. When the emperor wished to make him general, after he had rallied to the imperial cause, and when General Drouot was sent to announce his appointment to him, he replied, "Tell the emperor that I am not seeking any reward. If I accept anything, people will say I have been acting for motives of personal ambition. Such a sentiment is beneath me." In fact, he told me several times that he intended to resign from the army, and that if he remained in active service, it was simply because he was anxious to do his share in defending his country, along with all other Frenchmen. If it had not been for this, he would even have refused to be the emperor's aide-de-camp, for he detested the etiquette of the court. During peace times, the only thing he was interested in was his home life, and he tried to make his wife forgive him for the part he had played in recent events. She had withdrawn to the country with her mother, Madame de Chastellax, and refused to see her husband again because he had forsaken everything for a cause which she refused to accept. As a matter of fact, both their families were devoted to the Bourbons. Madame de la Bataillere had just recovered the large estates which had previously belonged to them. Consequently, no one lost more than her husband by the emperor's return. But the more completely he had overlooked this, the prouder he was to have done so. Who could help admiring such a character? After dinner, I returned to the Tuileries. The Duc de Vicence Caulaincourt had accepted the post of Minister of Foreign Affairs. The Duc de Trente Fouché had been made chief of police. The Duc de Bassano was still particularly popular with the emperor, who had dined alone with him. There were a number of people in the drawing room when I entered. Several ladies arrived later. The emperor chatted informally with everyone. He gave some details in regard to his life on Elba. He mentioned what a consolation it had been for him to have his mother and his sister Pauline there, and how much he enjoyed the quietness of the island. He conducted his household economically, but it cost him a good deal to keep up his guard, and he had begun to fear that he would have to dismiss it, although several Genoese had often offered to loan him money, fearing he might need some. Someone asked what had given him the idea of returning to France. He replied, "It was the newspapers. For a long time I did not receive any, and then 20 or more came all at once. I saw that attempts were being made to slander the army and to speak contemptuously of its former successes, while promotions and honors were being handed out to men who had never been under fire. Then, too, the purchasers of public property were being annoyed, and the important influence the priests were exercising must have made people fear the return of the tithing system. I was sure that if I managed to land in France, I should be hailed as a liberator. I was convinced that those who had so long been obliged to undergo hardships would employ all possible means to revive former customs and to undo the work the revolution had accomplished. But I admit I did not think they would set to work so quickly. I thought Louis XVIII cleverer than he turned out to be. The masses seemed very incensed against the poor priests," he added, "for everywhere the peasants, when they come to cheer my carriage, cry also, 'Down with the church party.'" The Duc de Bassano replied that in many districts and families the priests had sought to establish a kind of inquisition in regard to personal opinions. The country folk had been alarmed at the return of the tithing system, and moreover so many gloomy ceremonies had depressed everyone. It was already late. The emperor retired, and I too went home in great need of some rest. Just as I was going to bed, word came that my brother's steward was sending him a special messenger to Vienna to inform him of the events that had taken place, and I was asked if I had any special messages for him. I hastily scribbled a few lines. I mentioned the emperor's rather cold reception of me, the general enthusiasm, and expressed the hope of seeing my brother again shortly. I had very little to say about political matters, as I believed he would come back with the Empress and the King of Rome. In my letter, I did not forget to refer to my earnest hope for peace, which formed the most important object of my thoughts. I had so much enjoyed this year of mental repose that no other form of happiness seemed to me comparable with that freedom from all anxieties. I urged my brother not to neglect any means of persuading the Emperor Alexander to sacrifice his personal animosity for fear of causing a war, which, to judge by the enthusiasm of the French nation, would be a sanguinary and very long drawn-out one. The following morning, March 22nd, 1815, the Duc de Caulaincourt called. He asked me to write Empress Marie-Louise on behalf of the Emperor, who wished me to describe in detail his return and the welcome he had received, and to say how glad he would be to see her again. I hastened to do as the Emperor requested. I so wrongly judged what the attitude of the foreign powers would be toward the Emperor that I told the messenger to proceed directly to Vienna and deliver my letter to the Empress. I felt sure on the way he would meet my brother returning to Paris. How grievously I was mistaken. My letters were seized, opened, and criticized. People reading between the lines discovered traces of diplomatic maneuvers and dangerous insinuations. This interpretation nearly did my brother serious injury, as there was talk of imprisoning him in the Austrian citadel. He retained his liberty thanks only to the intervention of the Emperor of Russia and the King of Bavaria, and after he had given his word to remain neutral. When some time afterwards the Emperor informed me that my messenger had been captured, I seemed so surprised that he said to me, "What in the world did you put in your letter?" "Only what was taking place, sire," I replied. "But I am the more annoyed because I spoke of family matters. I admit I am still childish enough not to be willing to believe that people can take a letter and open it when it is addressed to someone else." The Emperor laughed.